Just before I start talking about this film, I want to reiterate something that I have said before. I have reviewed a few of the James Bond films that were requested in the past, and I talked a little bit about Casino Royale back when I did written reviews, which I don't do anymore, but I'm not a James Bond fan. But I want to stress that that doesn't mean that I think the James Bond series is bad. Oftentimes, when I say that I'm not a fan of something, people take that to automatically mean that I think it's bad, and that's why I don't like it. The James Bond series simply does not interest me, and there's a big difference between that and saying that I saw this and I think it's terrible, and that's why I don't want to see these. At the core of the earlier James Bond films that I have seen, I actually think that the James Bond series is taking a step back, actually pretty good. And when I watched Dr. No and I watched Goldfinger, I was able to understand at least why people like this series. It's just something about espionage and this kind of covert infiltration that takes place in these films. Something about that just doesn't interest me. I don't know why, but I can simply say it's a lack of interest and just step back and say that I understand why this series has fans. I'm talking about more of the older series now. The Sean Connery, Roger Moore series. I understand why people like those films. The Daniel Craig series is a little bit different. I'm not really sure how much of this just isn't my thing, and how much I don't really like the Daniel Craig series, at least from what I've seen. I've only seen two of his films, Casino Royale and this. I don't really remember very much about Casino Royale. I remember a few of the problems that I had with it, which is that I did not think that his James Bond was particularly interesting. I thought that the film was just giving him the plot through and through. I did not have that reaction to this film. I did not feel like the plot was simply giving him ways to win. But my problem with the Daniel Craig Bond series is that from the earlier Bonds that I've seen, which is just the Sean Connery films, I always found that there was a great sense of fun in those films. And I mean, some of it was meant to be taken seriously, but a lot of the time it was James Bond having fun and taking a certain amount of joy in what he does. Even when his life is in danger, he takes joy in what he does. I find the Daniel Craig Bond character to be somewhat stoic and just a little bit dull. It's not that Daniel Craig is a bad actor, and it's not necessarily that he's playing the role that he's playing badly, but this role is so much different than the fun-loving, relishing in what he does, James Bond. And as I said, full disclosure, I'm not a James Bond fan, but even if I was, I don't think that I would be a fan of this James Bond. So I just want to get that out of the way, because that was a consistent problem for me, even in this film. So some of you may be asking, if I'm not a James Bond fan, why am I reviewing this film? And obviously, people asked me to. They wanted to know what I think. And at first, I wasn't going to do this review because I said, well, I am not a James Bond fan. I'm probably not the one to be talking about this. But then people started saying that they wanted me to review this because John Logan wrote it. And I've said a few things about John Logan in the past. I don't think he's a bad writer. I think that he has really good ideas that he seems to have a great deal of difficulty implementing into a screenplay well. So when I was told that John Logan wrote this, that's when I decided to do this review, because I am a little bit curious. I always want to see him succeed in those great ideas that he brings to the table. And I'm always wondering if this is going to be the film where he does that. I think the best film that he has made in his whole career has been Rango, which was a movie about a talking chameleon of all things. But that was the closest he's come to doing a really good film. Unfortunately, as I went through the process of watching this film and listening to the dialogue and seeing what the plot was, seeing where the characters all fit, I was not able to identify his contributions, because he is one of 3 writers. And I think I caught a line in this film that was probably from him. It's something that M says to another agent. She says, he's from where Bond is from, the place that you think doesn't exist, the Shadows, or something like that. And that sounded like a John Logan line to me, sort of over complicatedly stating something to sound profound. It was very reminiscent of something I think John Logan would have wrote. Other than that, I couldn't really pick him out from the crowd, so unfortunately, I can't really tell you whether I think that he did a good job or not. When he co-writes, it's actually very difficult to pick out his contributions. He was a co-writer for Any Given Sunday, which I thought was a very good film, but I couldn't really pick out his contributions there either. So, unfortunately, all I can do is tell you what I thought of the film. I did think that this was a better film than Casino Royale. Unfortunately, I had kind of the same problem where this film was just a little bit joyless to me. I mean, it was so serious, and that's fine, and that has its place, but for a James Bond film, I thought it was just a little bit down. The plot here kind of works in 3 acts. The first one, Bond is after someone who has information about all these operatives that are undercover, and if he gets that information, he's going to blow their cover, so Bond has to stop him. Unfortunately, Bond is shot and presumed dead at the beginning of the film, and that kind of encompasses the first act where everybody thinks he's dead, and then he's not dead, and he has to come back into the fold and relearn everything, and he's not doing a great job. He's not passing his tests, he's not shooting very well, but they let him come back in anyway, or at least M lets him come back in anyway. That was somewhat interesting, I suppose, but I wasn't really sure where the whole everybody thinks James Bond is dead, but now he's not angle really fit into the rest of the film as it went on. It kind of seemed like this thing that just kind of came up in the beginning, and then they resolved it, they let him back in, and then the film moved along. So the beginning was actually just a little bit slow and just a little bit off the point for me. The middle of this film is kind of where things start to pick up, and I started to sense a theme in this film. We have a main villain who has a vendetta not against Bond, but against M, and that was kind of interesting. I hadn't really seen that before. Maybe it was brought up 1 or 2 times in the other Bond films that I haven't seen, but I hadn't seen that before. So somebody having a vendetta, a personal vendetta against M, it was actually kind of interesting to me. Unfortunately, the villain himself was not very interesting to me. He's one of those villains that kind of talks at you, and he's kind of a dialogue machine. He doesn't really have a very interesting angle other than his personal vendetta against M. He's not like Goldfinger or Dr. No, where they both kind of have their interesting little slant takes on a villain. He's a very standard villain in this, and he does villainous things, and he makes everybody run around and scramble around, and, he infiltrates their organization through technology. So he wasn't very interesting. And by the way, that has nothing to do with the fact that the villain in this film was the guy who played the villain in No Country for Old Men. I don't want anybody to think that just because I hated a movie that an actor happened to be in, that I'm following that actor around and saying that they do a shit job every single time. He did an adequate job, just the character was not very interesting. What I did find interesting is where the theme of this film came into play in the middle, and that was the question of whether or not the 00 agents and this whole agency in general is irrelevant or not. There was actually some question as to whether or not we even still need these people around, and whether or not what they're doing is even worthwhile or worth anyone's time. They're sort of seen as an antiquated, outdated organization that might have to go away. And M is taken to task in this film over the way she runs the organization and some of the decisions that were made. And that's when I started to see the theme of this film. It's the old versus the new, and the new thinking that the old needs to be put on the shelf or thrown away. That stuff in and of itself was actually pretty good, and one of the things that I found very interesting in this film, I thought it was the best part of the whole movie, is where they're having this trial of sorts, kind of the 00 agents are put on trial as to whether or not they're relevant, and the reason why they are relevant actually comes bursting through the door of the trial and starts shooting at them. I thought that was very spot on. The middle of this film was actually pretty good, if not somewhat slow. It does get a little heavy in the dialogue, but not bad. The middle of the film is not that bad. The third and final act consists of trying to trick the main villain into coming to them and forcing him into a final showdown. And we kind of have the theme of this film carried through into the climax, where these individual agents, it's 007 and M, and a groundskeeper at 007's old house, hold up with very minimalistic technology and one of the old Bond cars, and uses this old-style method to take down this very high-tech villain. So it's kind of a culmination of that old versus the new in the literal, trying to take this villain down. It was okay. It did bog down a little bit too much into action at the end, and I kind of thought that there was so much action and so little having to do with the plot that towards the end of the film, I mean, the action climax is so long, a little bit of the message and the theme of the film did get a little bit lost. And I'm not going to give away the ending. There's no spoilers here. But I did think the ending was somewhat lame. I'll just leave it at that. Overall, this was a fairly well-received film, and I think that is fair. I think that this movie was okay. If you like the Daniel Craig James Bond, you'll probably like this. This is definitely the best that I've seen of his franchise. Like I said, I'm not a fan. I'm not really personally invested in any of this. I think if I was, seeing the Bond car and seeing some of the stuff that gets revealed in the very, very end might have meant a little more to me. But as it stands, I'm not a fan. I'm not really interested in this series. So just take this review for what it is. I thought that this film was decent. How the James Bond fans regard this film, really, I leave it up to you. I'm taking a step back, saying it was decent, and that's really all I can say. As for John Logan, I wish I was able to more positively identify his contributions to this screenplay, because I think that this was a fairly successful screenplay, and if he had anything to do with the success at all, then I think he did a really good job. It's not the best. If this can be considered a John Logan film, it's not the best of his films that I've seen, but certainly not the worst either. So overall, not bad. So what did you guys think? Did you think it was good, decent, terrible? What did you think of the villain? What do you think of the Daniel Craig James Bond in the first place? Leave a comment below and let me know, and I hope you enjoyed the review.